In this video, we're going to be talking about a special type of atom called an ion. So just like how an isotope was an atom that had different numbers of neutrons, an ion is going to be an atom that has a different number of other particles. Again, you're going to need your notes, you're going to need something to write with. You're also going to want to have your periodic table for this, because I'm going to have you labeling stuff on it. So pause the video until you get those, but once you have everything you need, let's go. Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about are electrons. Now, normally the number of electrons and protons in an atom are the same because atoms have a neutral charge, right? So overall their charge is 0, which means the number of pluses and the number of minuses have to cancel each other out. If you have an imbalance of protons and electrons, or a different number of them, you've formed what's called an ion. So ions are atoms that have gained or lost electrons, right? So they are carrying what's called a charge, right? That charge can be positive or that charge can be negative. A cation is an ion that has lost electrons, and if you lose negatives, you become more positive. An anion is something that gains electrons, which means it takes on a negative charge. Now notice here, it doesn't become negative by losing protons, right? You can't lose protons because that determines what element you have. It can only gain or lose electrons. Now, cat and an you may have seen before if you talk about terminals on a battery, right? You have the cathode, which is the positive terminal of a battery, and the anode, which is the negative terminal of a battery. That'll come in a little bit as we do our engineering challenge a little later on. All right, so we'll talk about each of these ions in turn. Right, so cations, usually metals will form cations. Metals are losers, right? They lose electrons very easily. They form positive charges. The name of a cation is just the name of the metal, right? So if we take 2 electrons away from a magnesium atom, we form what's called the magnesium ion. Some metals can lose different numbers of electrons, like for example iron. Iron can lose 2 electrons, 3 electrons, or 6 electrons. And the way that we note that is we use a Roman numeral next to it. So if it's lost 2 electrons, we call it iron 2. If it's lost 3, we call it iron 3, using Roman numerals for those. Anions, so if cations are formed by metals, anions are usually formed by nonmetals. Again, you add electrons to these, and we'll get into how many electrons each of these things are going to add or lose in about a minute. Now, the name of the anion is just the root name of the element, and then you end it in the letters IDE, okay? So we have chlorine here. If we add an electron to make it negative, we formed chloride, right? So we took the root name, which is chlor, and change the ending to IDE. So that's all you have to do to name ions. Now, the charges of ions for different elements are mostly predictable. Right, so here's our example periodic table. And this is where we're going to start labeling it. So what we can do is right above the first column, every element in the first column forms an ion with a charge of +1. Every element in the second column forms an ion with a charge of +2. I'm going to skip over a little bit here. This box right here, which represents aluminum, is +3. Now, if I come over to the right-hand side, this next to last row right here, column number 17, forms a -1 charge. Column 16 forms a -2 charge. Column 15 usually forms a -3 charge for anything that's above this staircase line. This column right here, these 2 elements don't form charges. Boron also usually doesn't form a charge, and the noble gases in the last column also don't form a charge. Now you've noticed I've left an entire swath of elements starting here and going all the way over to this staircase line underneath. These right here can have multiple. Not all of them have multiple charges, but most of them do. Right, so for example, this right here is iron. Iron can be +2, +3, or +6. Right, so we come over here to like copper. Copper can be +1 or +2. Right, so they can have different charges. We'll work with them as we need to. And once we start talking about electron configuration, we'll really be able to figure out why things form the charges that they do. Right, but this is what I wanted you to label because this tells you for the different columns what charges they have. The other side of your periodic table, which is your chart of charges, will list by specific element what charges they have for most elements. Not everything is actually included there. All right, so those are ions, our charged particles. And I will see you guys next time when we start actually figuring out how many different protons, neutrons, and electrons things actually have.